I'm Cara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Jaime Jo Wright. Jaime is the author of 10 novels, including Christy Award and Daphne du Maurier Award winner, The House on Foster Hill, and Carol Award winner, The Reckoning at Gossamer Pond. She's also a 2-time Christy Award finalist and the ECPA bestselling author of The Vanishing at Castle Moreau, as well as 2 Publishers Weekly bestselling novellas. Jaime lives in Wisconsin with her family and cats. You can learn more at JaimeWrightBooks.com. Her next novel, Night Falls on Predicament Avenue, came out yesterday. Welcome to the show, Jaime.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so glad to have you here. We read your book last year, The Vanishing at Castle Moreau, for our book club, and it was the first time I had been introduced to your books, and it was one of the best books I read in 2023.
Wow. Thank you.
You are so welcome. I just loved it, and our whole book club did, actually. So
that's awesome.
I can't remember if it was the book we kicked off our book club with, but it was a smash hit for sure.
Well, that's always a relief. It's always nice to hear, because sometimes you put out your book and you're like, yep, my career is over. I mean, that's how you feel as a writer.
I can only imagine. I mean, there's so much vulnerability that has to go into putting your... I view them as babies. I imagine that's what it feels like.
It kind of is. Yeah. And then you have all these thoughts. And when the thoughts in your head on a daily basis don't make a lot of sense, you're really afraid that when you try and put it on paper, that it's going to, be understood by the reader and not just this unintelligible mush of words.
Well, and for us as the readers, it's so beautiful how you can bring it all together. And as now, after that, I'm like, oh, I want to go read your backlist, right? And so I'm reading all your other books. And so I'm so excited to have you on the show. But I'd love to talk a little bit about who you are, because I feel like you're so much more than this bio on the page.
Oh, just a little bit. Well, I'm from Wisconsin, and I am the stereotypical writer who loves cats. So that's why that made that into my bio. But outside of cats, I love coffee, which I used to be known as the professional coffee drinker before I was ever a writer on Facebook. That was my handle, and I was the professional coffee drinker. So it took me a long time to shake that and actually be known as a writer. But anyway,
I love it.
I grew up in Wisconsin. I have 2 children that are, well, one's a teenage girl. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying experience.
Don't tell me that yet.
Anybody. No,
mine's only 5.
Oh, well, I knew at 5 that 14 was going to be rough. No, she's a sweetheart, but she is a 14-year-old. And then I have a son who's going to be 12, and he's still mama's boy. So we're holding on to that for as long as we can.
Absolutely.
But for fun, I'm a country girl. We live on 40 acres in the woods. And
Beautiful.
When we go places for fun, it's always to Montana or places where we can camp, the Appalachian Mountains, just different places like that where it's nature and being surrounded by things in nature. It's really inspirational for the imagination, and it's really good for kids to get out and play. So
my kids are 8, 5, and 3, and so we've been doing a lot of camping because it just is really fun for them, and to take them and confine them into museums and things like that seems so much harder and stressful than here's the woods, let's go.
Go play, go have fun, use your imaginations.
Yes, and you speak about those wide open spaces. I miss it. My husband's in the military, which is why we're in San Diego.
Okay, yeah.
And it feels so big to me, and like big and busy. And I'm like, oh, yes. I need the cornfields. I need them back.
Yes. I think that's when you're a Midwestern person, is when you miss cornfields and cows. Then you know for sure that your heart is in the Midwest.
I know. And it's funny because when we were leaving it, I was so excited to leave, right? But now, many years later, I'm like, I do miss that. And I don't love the chaos. And so you have your new book coming out, The Night Falls on Predicament Avenue. Can you give the listeners a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I started dreaming up this book, which was actually really different from what I had thought I was going to do for my
Okay.
next novel. And the only reason it took me in this direction was I got sucked down the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole of newspapers.com. If you ever want to get sucked down a rabbit hole, go
Oh,
to newspapers.com and spend a couple hours looking at old newspapers.
okay.
And I came across this article from I don't know, 1894 or something like that. But anyway, there was a house in a town, and there was a man who was a recluse who lived in the house. And people just realized all of a sudden they hadn't seen him in town for a while. And when they went to his house, they didn't find him, but the house was like this massive crime scene. It was just things were overturned. There was just the way they described it in the newspaper was really gory. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that would be interesting if you had a house and you have a crime scene, but you don't have a victim. Like, did someone
Yeah.
die or did they not die? But if there's enough blood, you'd have to assume they died. So that's where Predicament Avenue came up. I thought of this house that has just this long history of people coming and going like transients. And then one day, it's got kind of this lore, the two sisters that are, way older than they should be doing this in the middle of the night, but they have a reason they're doing it. They're in their early 20s. They sneak to the house to do the typical town thing of you sneak up the stairs, you give the door knocker a kiss, and then you run. That's just like
Yeah.
it's like your rite of passage, and they've never done it. So together as sisters, they go and do it. Well, the one sister obviously is braver, and she goes up and she witnesses something through the window so traumatic that from that moment she's just like she shuts down
Yeah.
and nobody knows what it is, but there's a crime scene inside. And then my stories are split time,
Yeah.
so that's happening in the past, but then there's also a present. And so the present day story is it's the same house but in present day. And there's a young woman who is running it as a bed and breakfast, but she has major social anxiety. And the only reason she's running it as a bed and breakfast is it was her twin sister's dream to do, but her twin sister was abducted and murdered shortly after they were out of high school. And she's never really been able to, A, it's never been solved who did it. And B, she's never been able to move beyond it. So we have this house with two questionable murders that have never been solved, and you start seeing how they're kind of linking through the century. And
Yeah.
I try and make it where the reader's like, how on earth could two completely different families, one location, and two completely different murders actually be tied together?
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's it. I'm not good at
yeah.
short summaries.
No, I love it. And I'm always so impressed when you're like not putting in the spoilers as well, right? Like
It's
just
really
enough to
hard.
entice you to
Yes,
read
yes,
it.
it's really hard. It's really hard. And it was funny too because with the past character, I'm trying to remember her name because I'm on like a third book from there. I'm right. Oh, Effie. The past character, Effie, is she was hard for me to write because my personality is kind of like, well, if this is the problem, let's figure it out and,
Yeah.
wing it, that type of thing. And I wanted to write a character that was more, I don't want to say timid, but more traditional. Like so often in the times of like the late 1800s and early 1900s, book heroines are like trying to break free from the stereotype of what
Sure.
women were. And I was thinking, what would happen if you had a woman who actually wanted the stereotype? Like all she ever wanted was to be a housewife, a mother, to be the traditional woman. And she's actually thrust into a situation where she has to gain her independence and has to use her own mind and not rely on the status quo of the day, but she doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And she is traditional at heart. And so that was really different for me to write because I was like, oh, that's not what I would want.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want my father to say, just stay home, it's safer, and go, okay, thank you. That I'd be
Yeah.
like, no, I'm not staying home. And she's like, oh, thank you. And I'm like, how do I write a book when she doesn't want to go figure this out?
Yeah, but so different, exactly like you're saying, from other books
Yeah,
as well. And I could see where that's challenging for your personality when
very,
you're like,
yeah.
that's not me at all
No,
either.
there's a crime
What
scene. Take me there, please.
Yeah, when I was reading it, because I got an early copy of it,
Okay, yeah.
and I was reading it, I still resonated with them sneaking out of the house, and I love when I'm like, okay, these people are in the 1800s and they're doing what I did,
Yes,
and I won't say what year I
yes.
was doing that, but
No,
just
no.
when you're like, yeah, times haven't changed much.
No,
People
they
still
really
sneak out of the
haven't.
house and
Yeah.
do silly things and like you said, rites of passage in your community. And
Yeah, yeah.
I
And it
loved
was
that
always,
piece.
yeah, yeah. Well, it reminded me of when I was a kid that we had a rite of passage in our town where you had to sneak out to the local cemetery around midnight to see the glowing gravestone. And it was haunted. There's this gravestone that would start to glow. And so I snuck out with friends and we did it. And it did, it glowed. And then it was very disappointing when I found out that the only reason it glowed was because it was a very shiny granite and the streetlight reflected off of it. And that was the joke. It was to get you all hyped up and freaked out. And then you
Yeah,
got
exactly.
there and I'm going instantly, duh, it's a street lamp. What? This is
Yeah.
so disappointing. Where is the ghost?
Did you tell anybody or did you let the next generation have to go through the
Oh,
rite of passage as
the
well?
next generation always has to go through the rite of passage. And some of them still believe it's haunted. Like they're like, oh, it really glows. I saw it. I'm like, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. So we
that's
let them
funny.
believe it. It's fine. Just a street
Like,
lamp, but whatever.
yeah, yeah, and you got to go through it.
You do. You
So,
do.
have you always enjoyed, I feel like your books always have that thriller component to it, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. Is that how you read? Are those the type of books you gravitate towards?
I am a very eclectic reader.
Okay.
Um, and so yes, I definitely gravitate toward those types of books. I really enjoy, like Simone St. James and Darcy Coates, which is almost verging on horror and things like that. So some of that I'm a mood reader, so it
Okay.
depends on what I'm in the mood for. In the evenings, I will read like Julie Clausen and Sarah Ladd and Erica Vetch, and I'll just like dive deep into the Regency world,
Okay.
which a lot of people are really surprised by that. You read Regency, and like I'm not an avid Pride and Prejudice person either. I'm like, it was okay. But then
Yeah.
you throw a Sarah Ladd book in front of me, and I'm like, now that's Regency.
Oh,
Um,
well, thank you for giving us that tidbit because I've thought about
yes,
adding the question to my list here that I have of,
uh,
what's something we don't know about you that would surprise us? And you just
yeah,
gave us that. So,
yeah, it is. Yes, I get that more often. People are like, what's some of your favorite authors? And I'll be like, Sarah Ladd, and they're like, what?
yeah.
Regency? And I'm like, yeah, we don't always want to live in the dark and murderous places.
Yes. Yes. It's I feel like I have to read differently in morning versus night then. Would you kind
No,
of
I
think?
really read based on my moods. And
Okay.
and it's weird. And I don't know what influences them. I'll just be like, it's kind of like when you go to the fridge and you're like, I'm not sure what I'm in the mood to eat. And then you see something, you're like, oh, I'm in the
Yeah.
mood for that. It's how I am with books. So I'll have 4 or 5 different genres going at the
Yeah.
same time. So
Yeah. And I think that's the key because people will say, I don't know how you read multiple books at a time. And I'm like, if their stories are different enough,
yeah,
you can 100% do it. And I
right.
read very similar to that of like, I'm just in the mood for that right now. So I
Hmm.
need to have a couple going on at the same time to be able to
Right.
pull from
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
when I do get a free moment.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's where audiobooks come in nicely.
Yes.
That 5 minute shower turns into 10 minutes. You can get a little bit more audiobook time.
Yeah, and my house is much cleaner because of
Hmm.
audiobooks. I have
Hmm.
them to thank.
Yes, they're amazing tricks of the trade.
Yes. So, well, you have quite a list of novels behind your back at this point. Do you have
Yes.
a book that's been a favorite of yours to write?
Mm. I really loved writing The Curse of Misty Wayfair.
Okay.
And it's probably still one of my favorites. Mostly because I'd always wanted to write a book about an asylum. And that's the premise of The Curse of Misty Wayfair. Um, but I didn't want to write it from the standpoint of a haunted asylum.
Yeah.
I wanted to write it from the standpoint of a person who had gone through the experience of being in the asylum and how that would affect the generations and society around them.
Yeah.
And that's where Misty Wayfair comes in. And there's this legend and lore around Misty Wayfair, and she haunts the area because of the asylum. Um, but there was a lot of personal things that I threw in that book. I was going through a time when I wrote the book, actually, of and personal health issues. I'd been in the ICU for a while. I was having seizures and different things
Wow.
like that. And along with that came major panic attacks and major anxiety. Um, and so I wrote that into the book with Heidi, who was the present day character, and she would have these panic attacks. And the hero, Rhett, who kind of came alongside of her, um, I wrote to be more of a model of I don't mean to be rude, but more of a model of how you'd expect most men to react. Not
Okay.
the, oh, it's okay, let's breathe, and
Yeah.
those heroic fictional males that know exactly what to say to make you feel comforted.
Yeah.
He was more the kind of like, you'd kind of look at her and be like, oh, they're having a panic attack. And then he would just divert her attention to something else. And he really wouldn't make a big deal about it. Um, which I found in my own personal experience, sometimes that's exactly what you need. Is not the coddling so much as the
Sure.
somebody to just keep life going next to you
Yeah.
and let you work through it on your own. And so because there were so many themes like that woven through the Curse of Misty Wayfarer, and because I could do so much with the haunting in different ways, like you have the haunting of who is this Misty Wayfarer that occasionally still gets seen? Where did she come from? But then also the way it haunts memories haunts your soul, and family legacy and curse haunts your family. And so I kind of explored the concepts of haunting through various lenses, not just an actual paranormal haunting.
Yeah. Wow. I haven't read this one yet. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm running to Amazon after this to buy
Oh, the other thing
it.
that was really fun with this one was the research, because the past story has Thea in it, and she's a postmortem photographer. So this is the period of time where it was really popular, oddly popular, for photographers to go door to door. They would read obituaries in the paper, and they would show up at your door and offer to sell you postmortem photographs. And then they would set up the corpses and take the post-death
Oh my.
photograph as the last memento for the family. And it was extremely normal and
Yeah.
extremely popular. And
I can't believe that was a job.
it was a job. It was a job. And there was a whole science behind how they'd make these people look alive, or how they would, prop them up and hold their bodies up in the different times of day that they would, or not day, but different times from death, because they'd have to work around rigor mortis and all those different
Yeah.
things. So, not to be too gruesome, but it was really interesting to study and then to put that into a book with the past character who's just surrounded by death, and she's okay with it. So haunting to her is completely different.
Yeah. Her perspective is totally
Hmm.
different.
Hmm.
What would families do with these photos?
Put them on the mantle. See, I'm serious. I'm dead
I'm like,
serious. I'm not trying to be sarcastic.
no, I know, but like I'm having a moment of like, wow.
Yes, they would put them on the mantles. They
Okay.
would put them in their photo albums. Sometimes they'd frame them. They were what we would do with a photograph. And I don't understand why it took so long for them to realize you can still take the same picture while the person's alive.
Yeah.
Like, but they would seriously, and I think some of it was probably financially and economically influenced,
Yeah.
where they never really prioritized the photograph until they realized they would never see the
They
person
were
again.
gone. Yeah.
And at that point, it became a financial priority, where prior to that, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so they would take these photographs. But there's albums, like I bought a couple books that are, glossy paged photographs of the photograph albums. And they're just people who have passed away. And there's pictures of couples in coffins. There's pictures of, here's your four live children around the child that just passed away.
Yeah.
So you finally have a picture of all five of your children together.
Oh, they're
They're
just
really
like
sad.
heartbreaking at the
They're
same
very
time.
heartbreaking. They really are. There was one picture that just totally broke my heart. It was a picture of a mother, kind of propped up in bed, and she was holding her baby. And it looked on first glance like she had just curled up in bed with her baby. And then
Yeah.
as you look at it closer, and it tells the story down below that she'd been, had lost her life while giving birth.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so they had taken this picture because it was the last memory of the mother, and it was the only memory that her husband would have of the baby.
Yeah.
And that was the picture. And I'm like, oh. So a lot of men would carry it in their chest pockets.
Yeah.
They'd put them in lockets with a little lock of hair. There was a huge Memento Mori element to the Victorian and early Edwardian era,
Wow.
that a lot of people I don't think realize.
Yeah, I didn't know that at all. And
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking of what does your healing journey look like when you're carrying a photo like
Right?
that in your pocket?
Right. I know. But yet it was part of their healing journey. And we look at it as kind of, macabre, and it's kind of fun to write about now is Gothic and freaky, but it was very understood back then. Like it wasn't like if
Yeah.
you pulled a picture
It was
of your
normal.
deceased family member out, it wasn't like, oh, don't show me that. It was like, oh, that was part of the funeral ritual, the grieving process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah,
Normal times. And I'm sure
right,
one day people will be writing about our era.
right.
What
They
we
probably
did
will.
was strange. I don't know what it will be, but
Well,
well,
it'll probably be all the TikTok videos of us dancing around looking like weirdos to music that they're like, what? And
yeah.
people spent time watching hours of 15 seconds of people dancing to music. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
They did what?
It's so macabre now, but back then dancing to TikTok videos was fun.
Yeah. That would be so, yeah. It's
I
funny to
know
think about what
it is.
generationally will phase out. And I
Yeah.
even think about my kids, of like when they see stuff like from when we were kids and they're like,
Hmm.
what?
Yeah,
Like it's
I
only
know.
been a few years, not that long.
Yeah. Well, wait till your daughter's a teenager and then she starts going shopping with you and she's putting on the clothes that you swore you'd never wear again because they were awful.
I'm having a hard time walking in Target these days. I'm like, I was
Yeah.
hoping I'd never see that
Yeah.
type of clothing or hat or
Uh-huh.
shoe again.
Uh-huh. Yeah. My daughter came home yesterday with a pair of stonewashed black jeans. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no. And she's like, what do you mean they're cute and they're modest? I'm like, there's nothing, even daddy approves of them. And I'm like, I don't approve. No,
Yeah.
do not bring this style back.
I could go live in my middle school self with the band t-shirts and wide leg pants
Yes.
again. I mean, I
I
could
know.
be myself
Yeah.
again in a
Uh-huh.
new form.
We should have just saved all our clothes and assumed we'd never grow
Seriously.
larger and we'd have a full wardrobe.
Yes, 100%. Right now I'm like, okay, where do I go shop? Because I don't want to wear
Right.
these clothes again.
Well, I'd like to have a shirt that at least goes down to my waistline. That would be a
Yeah.
huge plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't wear this in front of my daughter.
No. And people wonder why I wear hoodies all the time. I'm like, you try and shop nowadays as a middle-aged woman. It's
Yeah.
hoodies. I'm sorry. That's where we're at.
That's what we're getting for sure.
Right.
So you mentioned it very briefly that you're like
Mhm.
3 books ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
It is really wild. So right now I'm launching Night Falls on Predicament Avenue, which I wrote well over a year ago.
Okay.
So it's really funny when you do interviews like this, you're trying like, oh, what was their name? What what was the name of that person?
Yeah.
And then since then I've written another book, which is currently in an editing phase.
Okay.
In fact, I'm expecting my editor to send it back to me pretty soon with, my commas fixed and things like that. And that one's the Spectres in the Glass House. That one
Okay.
comes out in October. And then
All
I'm
right.
writing another novel that's due the end of this month that just had a title. Actually, I can announce it here. Nobody knows it. So exclusive. The title
Okay.
is Tempest at Annabelle's Lighthouse.
Okay.
And that one is coming out next April. And so I'm finishing that one up while I'm brainstorming for the one that I have to write after that.
Wow. Wow.
So
I
yeah,
could
just
see we're keeping all of the like
yes.
storylines and characters. I would see where that would be challenging to keep
Yeah.
that straight.
Yeah. Every now and then I get a note from my editor in my manuscript going, I think this character was in 3 books ago. Let's change the name to be what it should be. I'm like,
Yeah.
oops. Oops. I was probably editing that one while we were doing this one.
Yeah.
Get it mixed up.
Wow. That's amazing to keep that all, track is
Yeah.
not the right word, but you know what I'm getting
Oh
at.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like you have to have a mental filing cabinet and then just shut that door and lock it and open
Yeah.
the other drawer and pull that one out.
Yeah. It's not happening in isolation. So it's a
No,
very interesting view. So
yes,
thank you
yeah,
for sharing that with us.
yeah, yeah. There's a nice stereotype that I sort of wish was true of authors that wake up in the morning, they make their coffee, and they settle into their nice little writing nook and they spend all day writing, and it's just one book that they focus on for an entire year. And they
Yeah.
turn it into their publisher, and then they get to write another book and never think about that last one. And it doesn't work like that. It's
Yeah.
like ping-ponging back and forth in the midst of children, in the midst of laundry,
Yeah. In the midst of real
in
life.
the midst of real life.
I've met a friend named Jackie along the way of podcasting, and
Mhm.
she put out her 75th episode of her podcast.
Wow.
And that is like 1% of podcasters. So she made this
Yeah.
hilarious post of like, I'm at the 1% of something finally in my life, but I still clean my own toilets and I make my own dinners.
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like this is very fitting for what you're saying is like
Yeah.
life is still happening.
Yeah, life
despite
still
all of
happens.
that.
People are always like, what do you do to celebrate when a book releases? I'm like, the laundry, and I finally get to clean the house. And my family's happy that mommy came up from the basement.
Yeah. I'm here.
I'm here. It's frozen pizza tonight instead of cold cereal.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that tidbit
No
of your life
problem.
because we
No
are
problem.
all out here living it and bumbling
Yeah.
along, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have shared that you are a mood reader.
Yes.
As you're in this, let's say your writing cave, because I'm
Mhm.
envisioning your writing cave in the basement.
Very much so.
Are you able to kind of read alongside of that, or do you take a break while you're really in the phases of writing?
I do mostly audiobook, and I usually
Okay.
do it at night when I'm taking a break from writing to get, the rest of the world in order.
Yeah.
So I'll do audiobook some, and then Sundays are pretty much a no write day, so I'll read a book on Sunday and just kind of relax and let my brain take a mental
Yeah.
break.
Yeah.
Which is hard to do when you're on deadline because you feel really like you're wasting time on a Sunday.
Sure.
But if you don't give your mind that mental rest, it's so much harder to write because you're tired. You're
Yeah.
tired. I can't even talk. So yes, I do some reading. I just don't do it as much as I do when I'm not on a tight deadline.
Yeah. And it's, I think, incredibly important for us to have our
Mhm.
boundaries too, right?
Oh
Of
yeah. Oh,
like,
for sure.
I need this time or this space, and I know it's
Yes.
going to make me better, even though it
Right.
seems like I'm, getting
Right.
into my deadline here.
Exactly.
So, and you need your family time too.
Oh yeah, and they need mom, they need to
Yeah.
know that they're more important than my books and
Yeah.
my imaginary characters. So
Yes. Well, you have also brought some of your favorite books along with you
yes,
today for a
yes,
book flight. So,
yes.
can you tell us about them,
I
please?
can. Okay, so nobody's going to be surprised. Well, they should be surprised if they know me. This is one of my favorites.
Ooh.
It's the complete collection of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yep.
I even have a sweatshirt that says I'm just a Poe girl. And my poor dad, gosh, I love that man, but he has early Alzheimer's, which is advancing rather quickly.
Oh,
And
I'm sorry to hear that.
it's fun. He cracks jokes about it though. It's really fun. We're the family that make fun of things that other people cry about. And so we'll walk in and my dad's like, I remembered my name this morning. I'm like, Dad, yes. Right. And so we're like, let's go out and get ice cream. So we make fun of that. But the other day I walked in wearing my sweatshirt that says, I'm just a Poe girl. And he goes, yeah, I don't get it. What? You're poor? I'm like, no, I'm not poor. I'm a Poe girl. Oh, what's a Poe? And I'm like, Edgar Allan Poe? A Poe? What's a Poe? And he couldn't figure it out. I said, Dad, okay,
Yeah.
it's the book, Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, Edgar. I don't know why I'm laughing at it. Everybody's really like, how do you laugh at that? But
Well, you have to find the light in the
you
moment
have
too.
to find the light in the moment. So we have fun.
Yeah.
But I'm a huge Edgar Allan Poe fan. So this is always on my desk because if I get stuck in a scene, I just get into reading Poe because then it puts me in the mood. Not that I'm like
Yeah.
stealing ideas, but it gives you that
Yeah.
emotional oomph to get you into that dark mode.
Yeah. Pulls your
Then,
brain in there. Well,
yes,
one question really quick
yes.
that I didn't ask you earlier. Have you always been a reader?
Oh, yes. I started reading when I was 4, and my mom didn't know I could read. So they had people over for dinner, and I was apparently on the floor with a book. And the guest goes, Joanne, is your daughter reading? She's like, no, she doesn't know how. And they're like, I think she knows how. And I was mimicking my brother who would have to come home and do his reading out loud for homework.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be out loud. So I was pretending to do my homework, but I was actually reading the book.
That's
And
amazing.
they figured that the way I figured out how to read was because I would sit next to my brother when he would read out loud. And
Yeah.
it just, something in my brain was wired to understand words. And
That's
so
amazing.
I know.
Were you
It's
reading
weird.
Poe back? Not at 4. I was going to go with back then, but that's a little.
Yes, I read The Telltale Heart when I was 4. And
But is that it, have you been reading Poe for a long time? Is that
No, I started
okay?
reading more of the Gothic literature when I was probably in my early high school years.
Okay.
That's when I started reading Hawthorne and Dickens and Poe and, all those more Gothic, Jane Eyre, all that type
Okay.
of stuff.
Okay.
Prior to that, it was more, your Nancy Drews and Trixie Beldens and, the
Sure.
stories that you hear about all the time.
Okay. Yeah, I was just kind of wondering in my mind, right, knowing some of your novels, like when did you kind of start branching into this genre and thinking you might write there?
Yes, yes. Well, this genre, I really didn't expect to write it. I was always planning to be like historical romance.
Okay.
But then I got tired of romance because I was like, it's the same story every time they
Yeah.
fall in love. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it was just for me, I was like, eh. So then I started throwing in dead bodies and then I started realizing how cool dead bodies were. And then I started thinking about that really sounds wrong, how cool dead bodies are. But whatever. It is what it is.
I'm
And then
actually a PT in my former life when I'm
okay,
not podcasting.
there
So
you go.
bodies and rigor mortis and all these things you've been talking about, I'm like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, check.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny because okay, this is an awful story to tell, but I'm going to tell it. So last weekend, we had a kitten. She was 6 months old. She was super energetic, like to the point I'm like, wow. So we had to keep her on a leash.
Okay.
And I was dumb and I took her off the leash thinking she's been with us so long, she's going to come when she's called. She didn't. And right in front of me, she ran out of the road. And it
Mm,
was the end of poor little said kitten when the red truck drove by. I did
mm.
not go to do anything for this poor dead cat. I called my husband. I was crying. I'm like, you need to go take care of the cat. I can't go. I cannot look at this. This is awful. I'm traumatized. Horrible day. And then my husband's like, and if that had been a person, I'm like, oh, I would have been there in a second.
Yeah.
And not because I'm like going there because I have the heart of an EMT. I'm going there because I have the heart of a coroner. Like, did you really die by the hand of a truck? Or
Yeah.
was there another foul pressure at play? He's like, you are so sick. He's like, you cry over a cat, but if it's a person, you rejoice. He's like, you're
Yeah.
sad.
Well, to really bring this full circle on dead bodies, my
Yes.
husband and I met in the cadaver lab in PT school.
Okay, that's like the most romantic story ever. I'm gonna have to interview you and then steal that for a book. I
Yeah.
love that. I absolutely love
Oh,
that.
yeah. I had the same said friend Jackie I was already talking about. She
Uh-huh.
did on Valentine's Day. Like, how'd you meet your spouse? And I was thinking, I was like, we literally met over bodies in the cadaver lab.
My heart just took that is the best romance novel right there. I
There you
love
go.
it. I love it. You have made me so happy today.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad I could be of service, but we're really cycling in the dead bodies here.
We
So
are, we are. You might lose some followers on Spotify. Sorry about that.
that's all right. They'll enjoy it too. Okay, so what is back to our book flight? What is
Yes.
your second book you brought
Okay.
today?
Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Okay, my second book is actually from an author, and it's got Poe sticking out of his head, out of its spine. It's my bookmark, right?
Yep, got your bookmark.
Um, yeah. But it's Hunt for Eden Star. This is actually speculative, and it's another genre that I really enjoy. Hunt for
Okay.
Eden Star is by, if you can get it without glowing,
Yep, I
DJ
got you.
Williams.
Yep.
And this is, I would say it's like Harry Potter meets Indiana Jones. There's lots of like lore and artifacts mixed in with Asian
Cool.
culture, mixed in with supernatural elements of like different powers and things like that. And it is from a Christian background, but it's not like overtly Christian. But it's got elements that kind of like nod to it, like allegorical. That would probably be
Okay.
the word. Kind of like
Yeah,
Narnia, like you can pull out things from it, but it's not necessarily overt.
sure.
Um, and this is the first one in the series, and then the second one just came out, and then there's the third coming. And they're just really fun reading. And yes, the people are teenagers, but you know what? It's not written like you have to be 13 to read it. It's like seriously a lot of adult like
Yeah.
concepts.
Well,
And
and
it's really
sometimes
good.
I feel like with the YA, it's like they get to the point so much faster too. So you can
They
really, I mean, you
do.
can just jump into that story
Yes.
and be
Yes.
transported quickly.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And DJ does this thing where like you don't have boundaries. Like he'll have portals and like Jack, the main character, is running through something, and all of a sudden he's in a different. He's like, how did I get here? And why am I here? Like I was running down the hall of the boarding school and now I'm here. And it's
Yeah.
just kind of fun because it plays with your mind and it plays with your imagination. in ways that it kind of reminds me a little bit of um, oh shoot, I can't remember the name of the book now. Oh well, I keep wanting to say The Hunger Games. Oh, Divergent,
Oh yeah.
where you have a team of teenagers, young adults that are going through and they keep finding things that they thought to be true but weren't, and different pieces of their world that they thought existed but don't.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's just really, I just really like it. So it's a really good book, and it's great. It's great for teenagers.
Which I also think is so true of life, right?
It is.
Like,
It
I mean,
is.
even now, I'm like, there's moments of like what I thought my 18-year-old self or 25-year-old self would be
I
and
know.
do, and you're like, nope, not doing
No. Mm-mm.
any of the things above.
Nope. Nope.
So I think that's so true of life. It's like things we thought were true, and then you get older, you're like, well, nope, that's not true. That was just given
Yeah.
to us on a platter like that, but it wasn't.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so, but I'm really intrigued by that book. Going to be adding it to my list for sure.
It's a really good one. And then like I told my daughter, I'm like, you're gonna read it because it's just got so much it's well written, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like it's not just a good story, but it's one of those stories that's layered and it's well written. So if you're wanting to learn writing craft, it's a good one to even read just from that standpoint because the author is just stellar. So
Wonderful. Okay, so that was Hunt for Eden Star by DJ Williams. And then what's
yes.
the last book you brought
Okay, the
today?
last book is I just discovered it, but the author's a new author. It's a debut author. It's called A Lady's Guide to Marvels and Misadventure.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've read this one yet.
I have not, but I've seen it and I've read the blurb and I'm like, that sounds right up my alley.
It's so quirky. Like it takes quirk to an altogether other level, but it's set in I think it's the 1860s. So it's Victorian England. It's around the world in 80 days
Yep.
meets kind of like Beauty and the Beast meets like Pride and Prejudice a little bit, right?
Yes.
And so it's so quirky and funny. And the gist of the story is the main character, I can't remember her name, Clara. She's basically trying to save the reputation of her family because if there's been accusations that there's insanity in their genetics.
Okay.
And so she's trying to prove that there's not and to save her family's reputation, which back in those days, that was a very very sincere issue.
Yeah.
Mental health was not tolerated very well.
As I was saying, you
And
didn't need much to say it was
no,
going
no,
on.
no. You could literally say, like, oh, I'm grieving my dead husband. And they're like, institutionalize her. And I'm not
Yeah.
even kidding. Like, they would
Yeah.
institutionalize widows that couldn't get past their grief. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So she's trying to save her family from that. Um, but her family is not mentally unstable, but just quirky. Like her house is filled with animals because her mom is basically the early version of PETA, right? And she wants to save every creature from instantaneous death, and God forbid you turn something into a fur collar. And
Yeah.
so that's funny. And then her grandfather is all about, wheels and gears. So there's a little bit of steampunk element. It's just been really fun to read. It's written by Angela Bell. She is a debut
Perfect.
author.
Okay. I was going to ask you that because I didn't think we said that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I keep seeing that one pop up and I'm like, that one,
Yeah.
it's got to go to the top of the TBR because it
Yeah,
sounds
it,
so
it
fun.
should. And it's an easy read. And when I say easy, I don't mean like the writing is simple. It's just written in a way that it's easy to read and you don't have to sit and try and digest 3 sentences to understand what the author was trying to
Perfect.
say. So it's a great like read that you can curl up with and just be entertained.
Yeah, that can be my evening read.
Yes.
I do
Yes.
read morning versus night differently because when I really need a lot of thought, that has to go in the morning because my brain
Yeah.
is mush by
But that makes
8:30.
total sense. That makes total sense.
So, well, wonderful. I am so glad you brought these books with you today. How
Yeah.
I love to end our show is with our
Mhm.
bonus pairing. So these are just a
Okay.
speed round of questions here.
Okay.
Are you a rereader?
No. Unless
Okay.
it's Poe. If it's Poe, yes.
Okay. All right. What is one book you've read that has changed your life?
Probably The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich
Okay.
Bonhoeffer. It's not
Yeah.
fiction, but it was written during World War II and the Holocaust era. And if you ever want to get serious about your faith and understand the cost of discipleship, that's the book.
Yeah. I have it on my shelf behind me actually because it
Hmm.
was recommended to me and okay. All right. It
Yeah.
is Easter season. Maybe I need to
And
grab it.
it's challenging. Read it with a highlighter, and it's okay if it takes you a year to get through because he holds no punches back. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And then where is your favorite place to read?
I love to read in the car. I don't get car sick.
I'm
And so
jealous.
the car is perfect because the kids, we are those parents that say, yes, you can watch your tablets for hours when we go
Yeah.
on vacation because
Same.
it's just, they're there and the quiet in the car is nice. And my
Yeah.
husband likes to drive and he doesn't like to, chit chat.
Yeah.
So it's perfect. There's no reason to do anything else. I'm not pulled in 40 directions because the dishes need done and
Yeah.
the garbage needs taken out. So the car, I love to read in
That's
the car.
amazing. My kids can read in the car and I'm always like, how do you do it? I
My
cannot.
kids can read in the car. They just don't want to read. They're like
Yeah.
reading a book versus tablet time.
Yeah. You're giving us an option.
I know, right? I should never have started it. I was a bad parent, but whatever.
Well, ours are reserved for travel purposes as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then lastly, what are you reading next?
I am thinking about reading a novel called The Long Road Home. It's been
Okay.
on my to be read list.
Yeah.
And the only reason I'm saying thinking is because I know it's going to be a hefty read. But it's written by Tosca Lee and Marcus Brotherton, and it's a World War II journey. But it's not like a World War II romance. It's actually about a band of guys trying to survive.
Yeah.
So I know it'll be a little bit hefty, but that's an era of history that I will probably never write in, but have always been extremely intrigued by. My grandfather was in the war for 4 years, and I've got all of his military army things from the war. His whole trunk is filled with. I mean, he even has some Japanese things that were probably pilfered that shouldn't have been, and
Wow.
just I have 4 years of letters and my dad was in the army as well. So I'm not in the military now, but I was in a military family.
Yeah.
And so I've always appreciated the stories of the men and the women who have really sacrificed everything
Yeah.
for our freedom. And I think we take it too lightly these days. So, but that's the
Yeah.
book I'm looking at reading is The Long Road Home.
Yeah, that one's on my list as well.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
historical fiction, if I like had to just grab something from a genre, I would go usually historical fiction is usually
Yeah.
my go-to because
Yeah.
I love learning and like putting history together in my mind from what I learned from school and piecing it all together and having it make
Yes.
sense through story, where versus like
Exactly.
just learning verbatim history facts. So,
Right. Yeah. I'm not always going to pick up a Stephen Ambrose book that's this thick, that's straight up history. It's like, ugh,
yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
lot, but
We need a story.
we need a story.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this. One last question. How do you
Yeah.
take your coffee?
A mood. Again, it's a mood thing. It kind of depends on the day. My daughter's like a self-made barista and she's
Okay.
got an espresso maker. So sometimes I'll have lattes in the morning because she makes them. But if it's just me and I'm just making coffee, I usually either just straight up black or I put in a little bit of heavy whipping cream if I'm feeling
Okay.
extra cozy.
All right. I love
So
it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I appreciate all the time that you've given me.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Jaime Jo Wright on mood reading and her book flight of some of her favorite books. We'd love to hear what you thought of this episode at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information about today's book flight or other books that we talked about. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are reading next, especially if you have heard about it on the show, please tag us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.